name is Sadian, and I'm the chair for today. The discussion is going to be about two case studies, which I think will be of great interest, both in themselves and because of the wider developmental and environmental issues that they touch on. And also, I should just note that what we're going to discuss today is itself linked to wider research on the beef value chain, which is absolutely essential for supporting many rural livelihoods in South Africa. At the same time, this research itself is concerned with the major environmental issue of rangeland restoration. So just to give you a bit of context, the ISER has partnered with the World Wildlife Fund, South Africa, and also with the WWF's Nedbank partnership as part of a consortium. And the consortium aims to safeguard strategic water source areas, to improve rural livelihoods, and also to promote land stewardship in the Eastern Cape Province of South Africa. Right. More generally, the work also seeks to reduce the climate risk and vulnerability of local communities, and it seeks to do this by engaging in dialogue with a range of stakeholders. Now, from the ISER's perspective, the research touches most directly on two of the ISER's four focus areas, namely environmental resource management, and here there's a focus in particular on land and water reform policies, and also on human and economic development, with a focus particularly on quality of life and urban and rural development. I should also mention here that the ISER is generally very receptive to research collaboration on these subjects, as well as on its two other focus areas, which are education and skills development, with a focus here particularly on technical skills training for the youth, and also on cross-border trade, including research on the African Growth and Opportunity Act and the new African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. So for those who are interested, please just feel free to get onto the ISER webpage on the Rhodes University websites, and you'll find more details there about how to get in touch. Okay, so let me just get straight ahead into it, and let me introduce today's presenter and respondent. So we're pleased to have Prof. Cyril Mbatha as our main presenter. For those of you who don't know him, Prof. Mbatha is the director of the ISER. He's an economist by training and has taught in a range of fields within economics. He has a background working at Unisa's Graduate School of Business Leadership, where he's occupied a number of top leadership positions. Okay, he's also worked at the Human Sciences Research Council, or HSRC, as their Chief Research Manager and head of their Labour Market Research Unit. Prof. Mbatha also used to lecture at Rhodes University in the Department of Economics and Economic History. I should perhaps also mention that he was the first director of the South African branch of the Young African Leaders Initiative, initiated by former US President Barack Obama. And he's participated in research with many government departments and research councils in South Africa, as well as with the United Nations Development Programme, and also with the World Trade Organization. Okay, we're also privileged to have Dr. Binganidzo Muchara with us. He'll respond to Prof. Mbatha once Prof. Mbatha has finished his presentation. And Dr. Muchara is a senior lecturer at Unisa's Graduate School of Business Leadership. He studied agricultural economics at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and he specializes in agricultural and resource economics with a focus on land and water resources. His other specializations are development economics, value chain analysis, and micro and macroeconomic theory. He's also produced many interesting academic pieces and reports, which you can find listed on the Unisa site if you're interested. Okay, before we get into it, I just want to mention a few procedural matters very briefly. Basically, Prof. Mbatha will talk for about 25 to 30 minutes. Then I'm going to hand over to Dr. Muchara for some responses. Okay, after that, this will be followed by a discussion time with questions and comments from everybody. Throughout both the presentation and the response, please just feel absolutely welcome to write down your questions in the Q&A box, which should be on your screens, hopefully. Then after Dr. Muchara has responded and Prof. Mbatha has answered, I'll then read aloud the questions that have been submitted. And if anything is unclear to me, I'll ask the people who asked the questions to state their questions themselves. This only will be done through audio, not through video, so you don't have to worry about your backgrounds. The discussion with comments, questions, and answers will take us to the end of the webinar, and we're going to try to keep the webinar from running over an hour and 30 minutes. All right, that's about it. So I'll hand over to Prof. Mbatha and then to Dr. Muchara. Thank you.
Can you see if I'm sharing?
At the moment, no.
Not yet. Okay. Okay.
Okay, it's coming up. Yeah.
Something is coming up.
Yeah. You can see your full screen now, so just put it in presentation mode if you can.
Okay, I'll do that. Okay, thank you. I think it's in presentation mode now, on my side anyway.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, fantastic.
I think it's
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. This afternoon, I'm glad to be discussing this research with you. I think it's for me anyway, it's a very important research. Because it's a collaborative research, but it also has developed over a number of years now. So it's very close to my heart, also because it links to some of the other research I do on land reform. Even though it's not directly on land reform, this one. Livestock production and marketing processes for small scale or emerging farmers. I'm looking at two cases, one in South Africa, one in Kenya, on cattle value chains. The aims of my presentation, I wanted to present and compare the two stories of these rural communities of farmers in two different countries. It's in the Eastern Cape as well as in the Rift Valley in Kenya, the other case. I would also like to identify lessons which can support the implementation of important national projects and policies. For example, I've stated earlier that the land reform project. To also discuss specific issues from each of the study that needs to be acknowledged as we empower small farmers, then present some of what I think are innovative ideas and feasible processes as opportunities for us researchers to include in our own research, and probably end with some discussion or some introduction of future work around this topic. The context is that the success of land reform programs, for example, is dependent on that by now we pretty much know that many of the failure of land reform projects has been because a lack of participation, successful participation of emerging farmers in the projects around land reform, not being able to join the commercial value chains, just amongst others. In livestock, specifically, methods of production, as well as difficulties in accessing markets, seem to be the two main challenges that also prevent participation of small farmers. In production, what normally happens is that there are problems with grazing and infrastructural problems that are identified through research. Some include vaccination, branding issues, some are cultural issues, and you'll see later on that cultural issues really seem to take the top spot in our discussions. On the marketing side, cultural issues also appear, also limited information, lack of access to markets is also one of the variables there that is contributing to the blockages. These challenges limiting farmers in different ways and at different levels in both of these studies. And we interrogate how they interplay, the dynamic relationship, to what levels they affect farmers, small farmers in South Africa, and how they affect small farmers in Kenya, and what we can learn, especially from ways in which farmers have tried to find innovative solutions through these problems. Some of the problems are intensive in Kenya than they are in SA and vice versa, but overall it appears to me that Kenyan farmers appear to be more resilient despite the many challenges that they face. But on the other hand, they seem to be faced with difficulties around prices, where prices they face are depressed. You'll see this even as I present the data, that they seem to be participating more, but the market conditions they face are really bad. And also they just struggle with production methods, with poor quality animals coming out of the system. So it's almost like, which devil do you choose? You don't participate as much, but when you do participate, the prices are better, quality of animals is higher, or there's greater participation, or maybe there's some middle ground. The methodological approach for this study is purely an institutional one. I'm verifying thematically common practices, processes and rules that apply in the different case studies. And I do this through field work observations, verification of the observations through formal discussions, as well as random discussions with field respondents, reviews of various reports, grey literature and academic literature. And I supplemented this with a survey of about 60 respondents, small farmers in Kenya, east and west of Kenya. But essentially what I do is map out what the emerging themes are from the responses from all the data collected, identify challenges and opportunities through this institutional economics framework. And some of the theories within this framework is around transactional costs theories, commonly embedded practices and institutions, theories around bargaining processes, for example, Ostrom. And I also use just the descriptive statistics from the structured survey from Kenya, only to support the institutional observations and arguments that I make. Some interesting related studies in South Africa. If you're interested, we'll also post this presentation on our online platforms, so you can have access to these. But these are studies that are interesting, I found, that are also in the same area. And then some agricultural stats that I think are important in orientating us to the nature and size of the beast that we're dealing with. In South Africa, the contribution to GDP is very small of the agricultural sector. It sort of like fluctuates around 2% in the past 10 years. And you can see there that the services sector is much, much bigger. So we are a services economy at this point. And then the registered commercial land use for agriculture is quite big. 46 of 122 is for agriculture. And then of that, livestock production, about 33% of the 46 million hectares, whilst crops is 20. So you can see that livestock production takes up a lot of land, what you would expect from the grazing that needs to happen there. The Free State and the Western Cape provinces use most of this land, and then the Eastern Cape is somewhere in between. Income from livestock Production, it is about 36% of agricultural income. So although, yeah, so livestock really contributes a lot to agricultural income. But in terms of employment, horticulture contributes more. And agriculture as a whole, although it is small at about 2% of GDP, we still employ lots of people in agriculture. Almost 1 million people, although this is gradually declining over time as we're becoming more services oriented. In any case, even around the land use for agriculture, around income variables, around employment, the Eastern Cape stands somewhere in the middle for those. So, but for the informal sector, data is a challenge to find and then to construct in usable ways, although the sector is very important for transformation. And you will see this also where I talk about ownership of livestock by small farmers, where they own almost a third of livestock, but only 10% of them participate in formal auctions. So this is an area where transformation could be unlocked, and if proper research is done and data is made available and presented in a useful manner. The small scale sector, mainly these farmers are located in the former homelands, like the former Transkei, former Leboa, and many farmers would own a very small herd as opposed to commercial farmers where there are many and own larger herds of livestock. About 70 years ago, this was the composition in the Eastern Cape of livestock ownership. Couldn't find the latest data, but you can see there that sheep and goats, there's more of that as opposed to cattle. Could be due to costs. But another interesting stat is that, or feature is that these animals are kept involved in very small pieces of land. 1.56 hectare per large unit, where for healthy stock, it should be around 7 hectares. So, and this leads to overgrazing, health issues, and then poor prices and wasted efforts really for the farmers and researchers, if the production stage of the value chain is not sorted out. Just a side note, for me, it's interesting that sheep, kind of dominates the proportion in the Eastern Cape. And I imagine this, and some people in the audience might have better ideas, but it could be due to the use of goats versus sheep in traditional sense in the Eastern Cape versus KZN, where goats are predominantly used in KZN, and we hardly use sheep. Talking as somebody who comes from KZN. Anyway, that was just a side note, interesting for me. Some notable differences between Kenya and South Africa. Unlike in South Africa, agricultural sector is the backbone of the economy in Kenya. It contributes 33% to GDP, employs 70% of the rural population. So it is much, much more important for them. Generally, small farmers in Kenya have established very good networks for selling their stock, and they participate by far. Their participation rate in these formal markets is by far higher than the one observed in South Africa. In the Rift Valley, in towns like Eldoret, the ones that I list there, small farmers participated in weekly auctions of livestock. And there was no segregation of animals like we do in South Africa, where there would be an auction just for beef, an auction for sheep, etc. I went to auctions where the animals would kind of just mix together and report what you want to buy. But still, farmers had, there was quite an unequal share of the market. Sorry. There was quite an almost equal share of the total market, where pastoral areas contributed over 45% of beef to the market, and the rest came from commercial ranches. This is also just indicative of this high rate of participation of small farmers in the total market. It was actually I wanted to talk about prices, that they don't control prices. That was the point coming to my brain. But it is more difficult to export livestock or meat from Kenya because the markets are kind of not regulated. So the WTO sanitary measures prevents lots of meat exports from Kenya. But I did read about some exports that go to the Middle East coming from Kenya, but those exports do not go to Europe. In any case, there are still well-established regional and national networks of red meat, as you will see in this next slide. Lots of livestock is coming from Ethiopia, some coming from Uganda, and then lots coming from Tanzania, as well as Somalia there. So you can see that there's a lot of cross-border trade that is taking place there. So let me just go to my next slide.
Prof.
Hello.
Prof, I'm so sorry to disturb. We're getting comments about the presentation. People can't see it because you're in slideshow mode, and we can see like your next slide as well. But I think if you end it and go to presentation mode, then we'll be able to have a see your slides in full screen.
Presentation mode. Okay.
Yes, I'm so sorry to disturb you.
No problem. Let me just see. Oh, how to swap present view. Let me just get out and see if. What can you see now? Is this much better? I'm not.
No, Prof. So you see at the bottom of your screen next to the next to that zoom button, it has like a weird sort of thing that looks like a wine glass.
Where? Here?
No, at the bottom of your screen.
At the bottom of the screen, yes.
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
Okay, slideshow. Okay. It just takes it to this double slides.
Oh, no, not this one. The one that says presentation.
One before. Okay, which one is that? This one?
I can't see. The next one, Prof.
So I've got only the three slides, the three buttons here. Sorry to everyone, there's a big rain outside.
So you can the slideshow at the top and then just drop down and go show from current slide. See on the menu at the top, there's slideshow.
Yeah. And then which one? This one?
Slideshow, yeah, and see what drops down. And then just go from current slide. Oh, it still has that. Okay, go to display settings.
You look at display settings, it will work.
Display settings in your
display settings.
Slideshow, in slideshow
Go
mode.
back to slide, okay. Go here, I think, from beginning, from current, okay.
Current. And then go to display settings to see if that changes.
So here it says I must swap presenter view. Should I do that?
Try that.
Is it better?
Yeah,
sorry?
Better, we've got it now.
Okay, fantastic. Let me just go to the slide I was at. I don't. Thank you so much, colleagues. I think I passed this one. I passed the map. Yeah, okay. Okay, just from the map, there are opportunities for cross-border trade, as I mentioned, where small farmers would track animals for days on land, and along the way, there would be various points of transactions taking place before destination. The many sources and the complex networks would then provide opportunities for innovation, but unfortunately also abuse. Farmers have limited market power compared to other local players, especially brokers or traders or butchers, much up higher the value chains. Cases of broker collusion have been documented where they are suppressing prices. This is what brokers reported, or how brokers or traders are reported to operate in this value chain. They would either buy directly, they would rather buy just a stock directly from the source at the gate and then transport it or sell it at terminal markets, for example, in Nairobi. Or there would be a detour where they would buy stock from the source, but only to transport it to secondary destinations, like ranches where it would be fattened. This was before the stock was further transported or sold at terminal markets. I just have to say that we've observed that this also happens in the Eastern Cape. We just have to verify the degree to which this is also happening. There was also what I would term a delayed tour, where stock would be bought young at a third of the price and then kept for a number of years to be resold at a later stage. In 2019, this was for around 20,000 Kenyan shillings. And then there's something that I would call hybrid maintenance, where the traders would hire ranches along the way on their trekking routes, and then along the way they would be fattening these cattle. And some of these cattle would be coming all the way from Somalia. Studies show that traders, the way that they control the manner or the extent to which they control the market, they would even make profit margins of about 80%. And this would be in exclusion of running costs, just profits, not revenues. There would also, because of this, the complexity of these networks, there would also be opportunities, extra opportunities for collecting tax revenues, but as I stated earlier on, also for corruption. Some of the tax collection opportunities were around meat inspections, certification of transports, vetting, health certificates, transport permits, abattoir, and I have to say that this was not very different from what we observed in South Africa. I think the only difference is that most of these costs are externalized, especially in the case that I'm looking at. There is lots of NGO support that provides assistance for farmers to vaccinate their animals. Also, because we have mobile options, then they don't have to worry about transport costs. But we still need to quantify the extent of these costs, even though they're being currently carried by external players. So a typical day at an auction in Eastern Kenya, which I said earlier on that is quite layered. You would have what I saw as 3 stages, where there would be opening and registration, and then there would be a period of about 2 hours where sellers and buyers are allowed to negotiate before stock is taken to the bidding process. So if you can agree on a deal, that's it. You are out of the loop. And observations, 10 to 15% of the deals are struck there at that stage. And for each stage, there's an amount of money that is being paid. So if you count, so at stage 1, you will see about 100 shillings paid, stage 2, 200 shillings paid, etc. Then stage 2, animals are being inspected, followed by price negotiations with organizers, especially around the initial prices to start, and then there's that bidding process there. If there are no agreements, then the animals are removed, but you still pay for having reached that stage. All right, in Wales, auctions for small farmers are much bigger and much more frequent than in the Eastern Cape, where on a day you would have about 200, 300 sellers in East Kenya. This number is much higher, where on average in the Eastern Cape you would only have about 55 sellers. This is data coming since 2014. And also the number of buyers. Number of buyers is very small, and this is also related to the control, price control or market control higher up the value chain. In any case, in the Eastern Cape, you know, you'd go to an auction and you'd only have, you know, around five buyers. Yeah, so whereas in Kenya you would have 100 to 150 buyers. But I have to say that some of these buyers in Kenya are also sellers. So there's lots of like innovation, buying and selling elsewhere. You know, that's why they're called traders. They don't really produce these animals, they just trade. Yeah, so there's that registration fee there. I don't remember if there's a fee in the Eastern Cape, actually. And some of the colleagues who are here as part of our collaboration in this research, you just remind me. I don't think that there's a fee once you reach the auction day, when villagers get to the auction day. And if there are debates and you are not happy, you still pay. You still lose that money that you've paid at registration in Kenya. But in the Eastern Cape, I've observed long debates where animals are withdrawn from sales without penalties, sometimes even brought back for the second time around. You know, so I think that is an incentive there, that sellers then sell their animals once they've entered them into the show. Yeah, so that's the process there, about 2 to 3 hours dedicated to buy inspection of animals and yeah, setting up that price and that 10 to 15% sales happening at that stage too. Yeah, so I've mentioned most of this. Yeah, so another thing in Kenya, instead of using a commission, they use a flat rate. Once the animals have been sold, you pay the organizers a flat rate. In 2018, 200 Kenyan shillings. In South Africa, there's a percentage, around about 6% that is paid, and this is a total of the price of the animal, 6% of the price of the animal. So, for example, in Kenya, you would sell an animal for 20,000 Kenyan shillings, animal weighing about 350 kgs, but you, as a seller, you would only be paying that 200, and this is about 0.0% of the. So obviously, organizers of auctions in South Africa make much more money per animal sold. I don't know if this is compensated by the number of sales, which is higher in Kenya. But I didn't see police or government officials branding, checking those kind of things in Kenya. I don't know if They have got theft problems, as we do in South Africa, especially in the area around Mbatha, where these measures are very important. The specific case of South Africa in now this value chain, beef value chain in Mbatha that we are looking at, is very important for these villagers, rural communities in the case study. And it also forms a part. So this is also a difference with Kenya. In South Africa, in the South African case, the beef value chain we are looking at forms a part of the holistic scheme, which is aimed at rangeland restoration. You know, my colleagues often remind me that this value chain is only the tip of the iceberg, Prof. You know, we really are looking at rangeland restoration. You know, these are just the incentives. In any case, the value chain forms is part of one of the main incentives and to encourage participation. So we're bringing the business to them, sorry, not me, the NGOs, and then encourage them to participate in rotational grazing, in the removal of wattle, you know, just to improve the environment and for sustainable production of crops and animals. So they also do mobilization of citizens, amakosi or chiefs in the area, organizing various meetings in villages, ensure that stakeholders participate in these meetings. These NGOs or organizations include Conservation South Africa and Environmental Rural Solutions, as well as Lima, I think. And they also do the registering and monitoring of the villagers participating in the mobile auctions. A company participating in this whole model is also Meet Naturally, which brings in the business side of the auctions. It's the company that charges the commission, and that's really their business. And the commission rate would drop if organizers, if the NGOs find that the villages are performing well in terms of environmental restoration. So each village is given a rating, and each rating is associated with a specific commission rate at the auctions. The better your environment is, the higher commission you are charged for selling an animal at the auctions, and that is an incentive to participate even more. This is really what this looks like. Holistically, this model, you can see there at the top some of the outputs, household livelihoods and incomes, for example, coming from these auctions, productive herds, improved rangeland quality, reduced degradation, increased resilience. And then what the NGOs bring in is training, bring in the auctions, husbandry, incentives, management structure, monitoring and evaluation. And some of the NGOs are supported by organizations like the WWF. So, and you can see that the role players are quite plenty, the farmers themselves, people called eco-rangers, implementing partners, the Meet Natural Traditional Authority, even the state. Actions, assessments, awareness, rebuilding of systems, even infrastructure, rebuilding of fountains. We've observed those in the field. So very active, very involved model this is. And it's quite holistic. It's not just about the beef market, the beef value chain, as they remind me. Anyway, observations on auction days, average price sold in 2018, for example, about 6,500. And the highest price fetched was 15,000 for that year. But this year in Mafube village, we observed animals being sold at more than 17,000 rands. Have to say that these prices are much higher than the prices fetched in Kenya. 20,000 Kenyan shillings. What's the exchange rate? 1 is to around 5. So much higher. But the number of auctions are fewer in South Africa for these small farmers. They're much higher in Kenya. In fact, in Kenya, the number of auctions is comparable to the number of actions for commercial farmers. Conversion rate is 90%, quite similar to Kenya, for South Africa as well. Yeah, so higher numbers of auctions, higher numbers of buyers and sellers in the Rift Valley. So there's more quantity in Kenya, maybe, and more quality in South Africa, even in terms of the quality of the meat. But in terms of destinations of the animals after being sold, this seems quite similar between South Africa and Kenya. Abattoirs, local butcheries, local farms, you know, these ranches where they're going to get fattened, etc. But we need to understand the composition of these channels in terms of their size and in terms of their importance for this value chain, if we are to future-proof the value chain. And yeah, so the reps who are present might present more information, more data around this model and the data. But this is the visual, just visually what the days at the auctions look like. The animals are very different. And here I'm even choosing some added elements of the auctions in the Eastern Cape where school children come. And I don't know which subject this is at school, but they come in and observe these auctions as practicals in the villages. So those are positive externalities provided for the Department of Basic Education by the project. So thematic discussion of the issues, as I said, I've used this institutional framework looking at evolution of rules, bargaining power, market competition, and grouped the themes as they emerge from the cases. On top of the list are the governance issues, the cultural issues are there, and then the socio-political issues come second, followed by market power. Infrastructure is there at the end. Rules of governance are most NB. And that is how then I compare what is happening in the cases by using what is thematically important for the cases. There are many similarities around rules and traditions. Rules apply to all players sometimes, and in some instances, the rules only apply to specific groups. So there's inconsistency in terms of who is accountable. Around traditional uses of livestock, there seems to be overlaps here, especially amongst the nomadic people in Kenya. But not so much with the more settled farmers. These are the traditional uses of livestock. Storage of wealth, spiritual uses, bride price, etc., those types of uses. Kenyans just seem to be more about business. That's why you've got lots of trading taking place there. Traditional considerations in SA amongst these in this sector, small or emerging farmer sector in villages, traditional considerations seem just to be much stronger. And I could argue that this may also be impacting on participation, especially around gender. For SA, communal farmers may collectively own a third of livestock, but only contribute 10% to auctions. That's very low participation. And we want to see if this also happens in the Umzimvubu catchment, because that statistic is for the country. Around the theme, around market competition and bargaining powers, general market exclusion is deeper in South Africa. There's a lot more participation in Kenya, but in both cases, the emerging or small farmers have little market power. They don't control lots. In fact, in Kenya, this has even led to the emergence of the use of online tools or digital markets to try and sabotage traders, especially around crop production. Instead of having somebody taking the produce from the gate of the farmer and ferrying it or transporting to elsewhere, another region of the country that maybe has drought. These digital markets where people can just take pictures of their livestock or produce and put it up on the web. Facebook is very useful for this, with a community of about 500,000 farmers participating, buyers and sellers online. This is quite strong amongst small farmers in Kenya. So quite innovative tools to try and solve their own problems. In South Africa, there's even little understanding of the market itself. Never mind thinking about how we win back the power, the market power. So it's really going to take a while, I think, you know, to address this lack of agency for transformation. So it is important that there is education, not only on market dynamics, but also start introducing participants. I mean, in some instances, there's quite a deep-rooted use of online tools. I think those need to be introduced to these value chains, especially for these groups. Political power and bargaining in Mzimvubu, traditional leaders, lots of stakeholders, but with stakeholders, lots of arguments around, lots of time taken to reach decisions through negotiations. In the Kenyan case, these transaction costs are less. And as we know, transaction costs often stifle innovation in the long term, especially because in the Eastern Cape, there's this unequal share of information. So, and small farmers really do not set the global agenda. And as Ostrom warns, this is a recipe for disaster. No agreement is sustainable where parties don't have equal knowledge. So we could be setting up models that are only working because we are there, and when we pull out, they collapse because they were not taken over by the local stakeholders. So this is also a very much long-term problem to address. I'm very happy that one of our colleagues at Department of Education is looking at the school curriculum in terms of how it could support beef value chains. And already there are these schools activities or presence at auctions. So it would be a nice sub-project there. Anyway, ultimately, culture and knowledge trump strategy on any given day. And it's important to address these governance issues. I'm just going to wrap through. How much time do I have?
It would be good if you start wrapping up pretty soon, okay, just so we can also have some of the exchange with you, Dr. Muchara.
Okay, yeah, all right. So the Kenyan model has got many layers, strong male dominance in both cases. In South Africa, women are disenfranchised at the production stage, land ownership problems, those sort of like stream down and get observed at auctions. So we can't just address women participation at auctions without addressing land ownership issues, especially around gender. Women are only observed at fringe markets where women are selling food to men bidding at auctions. South Africa has got this commission system. Kenya has got a flat rate. By far, South African organizers make more money per animal sold. I'm not sure if the use of a flat rate would improve participation in South Africa. This is a possible research question. But also the incentive of using a commission is that the organizers are then motivated to sell animals at higher prices, especially looking at the initial prices. It's just more oomph, you know? So I don't know where the balance is there between ensuring that the organizers continue in, with their businesses, but also we improve participation. So this needs addressing. So that is the study looking at Kenya versus South Africa, specific case studies. And this was very coincidental that such a study would then be aligned with a study that has now been proposed by the WWF to look at how we can future-proof the grass-fed beef value chain in this very same area in Mbatha. But as you can see from the objectives there, we're looking at environmental impacts as well. We're looking at future climate change, and what is common there is probably the socio-economic threats. You know, how we can then adapt these regenerative solutions to other areas, how we can develop, we need to develop a framework for this that would future-proof this value chain. So as we are identifying all the problems one by one, how we can improve on them, ultimately we want to put together a framework that is future-proof for this value chain. But some of the reflections for future research, for me, the environmental and climate change themes are very strong in the proposed research, but do not emerge organically from the data, as you saw. So I think the agenda that is set externally, we need to reflect carefully on this, and this would provide a research challenge that we need to navigate carefully. You know, I think we can talk about drought maybe, because that is quite there, I think, though, yeah. So maybe it's also the issue of language, how we present these themes. But yeah, so we need to address these themes and ensure that this is part of how the communities see themselves in terms of how they improve themselves. This is one of the problems. But opportunities is that both the NGOs agree with me that governance and cultural issues have been key on the ground. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Prof. Mbatha. That was great. I have some observations, but I think let's go straight to the respondent, Dr. Muchara, if you're ready to speak already, Dr. Muchara.
Yes, good afternoon. I can upload my presentation.
Okay, yes, please go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay, while Dr. Muchara is busy uploading that, I just wanted to make two very quick observations. And the one thing that struck me, and this is something we can maybe get into if Dr. Muchara doesn't himself raise it, is the strong cultural and institutional awareness that actually informs this research. And it's, to me personally, it's very nice to see economic research being done with these kind of institutional and cultural sensitivities that feed into it, because they have real outcomes for the actual economic data. And it's very hard to model, but it's very rewarding and it works. And I also found it very interesting that Prof. Mbatha saw an interesting role for the state in stepping up its role in linking producers to markets. And I think that's also something that we could maybe get into, but let's first see what Dr. Muchara has to say. Can you, okay, yep. Can you increase the size of your presentation?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I've just beamed my picture there so that people can attach the face to the presentation, and I can actually switch it off now so that we can improve the bandwidth. But as of introduction, I am Binganidzo Muchara. I am based at the Graduate School of Business Leadership, Unisa, and I'm going to talk to what Cyril has presented. Thank you very much, Cyril, for setting the stage and giving me the opportunity to be a respondent to your article and to your presentation. I'm going to switch off the presentation, Chair, not the presentation, my video, so that at least we can improve the bandwidth.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you. So my presentation, I've titled Smallholder Livestock Production Marketing in South Africa, Potential for Growth. Basically, my presentation is aligned to what Prof. Mbatha has presented. And I'm just going to highlight some of the key issues that are actually bedeviling the production systems and marketing systems in South Africa. And these challenges are basically linked to what Prof. Mbatha has already highlighted. There could be some, emphasis on some of those issues, but the livestock sector is one sector that is quite important. That is quite important when it comes to the development of the economy. And I'm not going to labor much on the statistics, and I think Prof. Mbatha is managing to highlight all the statistics that might actually inform us to say why the smallholder livestock farming. And in general, though production of livestock is evident at communal level, the participation of smallholder farmers along the value chain remains minimal. And as Prof. Mbatha actually talked to, we have seen some various market dynamics that are happening in terms of auctioning of livestock, in terms of actually making sure that the producers, the farmers themselves, gain something out of the livestock production. However, as you could have seen, that much of the marketing is happening at primary production level, which is at farm level. The question now remains as to what are the benefits of these farmers moving up the ladder into the higher parts of the value chain. We know that the profit margins at primary production for most of the agricultural outputs are very minimal, and that's where much of the risks in terms of production are infested. We are talking of the climate risk at production level, at farm level. We are talking of even financial losses, your diseases. They are all putting pressure, they are all exerting pressure on the farmer, and worse on the smallholder farmer. So by trying to manage these risks, what are the possibilities that these farmers can also take part in the higher levels of the value chain? And are there any benefits associated to that? Or we can put them at a much worse off position? I think these are some of the issues that we might need to engage so that we really understand whether a value addition or participating at higher levels of the value chain actually brings in the incentives that we all need. And we can also see that as they go up the value chain, the potential contribution to the economy, considering the multiplier effect, might actually be much more. But then what is the reality? What is the actual practical implications of actually upscaling our farmers from being primary producers to being maybe processors or maybe intermediary producers of certain products along the value chain? The government of South Africa specifically have come up with lots of programs in terms of developing smallholder farmers in general. And we have seen massification programs, extension services being scaled up, land reform coming in different formats to actually upscale the farmers. But most of these programs, some of them, like the massification, has always been focusing on crop production and minimum on livestock production. But we know that the bedrock of most of these communities is mostly on the livestock production, on the livestock production as well. But these extension services, massification, land reform, yes, we can acknowledge that there are some benefits that have been reaped by the farmers, but to what extent? And I think most of you in the panel can agree that these land reform, the programs have reaped actually minimum benefits. Some of these programs have actually collapsed because of lack of follow-up programs, lack of capacitation, training has been minimal. So, and resource constrained in the world to continuously sustain these farmers has actually limited the progress of smallholder farmers. And what are these characteristics? And Prof. Mbatha has highlighted some of these characteristics. We do have long distance to markets. This applies to both livestock and crop farmers. So these farmers, for them to access the formal markets, they have to travel long distances. And then the most important attribute is the short value chains reliant on local markets. These are dominated mostly by farmer-to-farmer trading, farmer to local retail trading to local trader. These are the most dominant one, and the limited markets within the local communities, because each one person is a small number of livestock that they can sell at a time, really restrict the growth of this market. It remains as it is, and if you can if you can relate to these communities where we come from, we came from these communities where one farmer keeps 10 livestock heads, and then you go back 10 years later, they are still 10 or they have reduced in number. So whether these are being kept for just livelihood purposes or for business purposes, we still need to interrogate that and say, are these farmers better off at the scale at which they are producing, or they can be better off when they increase production? And vis-a-vis some of the dynamics that Prof. Mbatha has highlighted, the issues to do with land degradation, environmental impact issues when you really scale up production of these farmers, especially at extensive grazing and compared to intensive. But if you go intensification, possibly the outcomes could be different. But are the resources available to actually allow intensification of these enterprises at smallholder level? So, and all these challenges are also worsened by the poor infrastructure. Your road systems, even your auction pens, they are also affected because the government is the sole funder of most of this infrastructure, and as a government, most cases the basket from which they can take all these resources is actually dwindling by each day. So what is the role of other players in making sure that infrastructure become much more viable and become much more sustainable? And farmers, of course, they do want to put efforts in participating in these systems, but the question is, are they willing in this battle to participate in most of these farmers? And as you know, most of the economic thinking is about efficiency. And as we debate all these issues to do with markets, we cannot deny the fact that we are most inclined to neoclassical economics way of thinking, well-functioning markets and the Pareto optimal efficiency outcomes are to be achieved, with minimum market failures and distortions have to be minimized. So we are arguing that smallholder livestock can always increase in terms of value chain participation, value addition, if we minimize all these failures along the markets, if we minimize the leakages along the markets. So by so doing, we have to be cognizant that the smallholder farmer by nature and by the design of their setup, there are also other livelihood goals that they have that they need to achieve. And this makes the whole analysis a bit complex, because the farm enterprise is tightly intertwined with household dynamics, since all these households rely largely in family labor to manage the farm and to play dual roles as both producers and consumers of agricultural produce. Then the question of efficiency now should be viewed much more wider than just an issue of pricing and farmers getting something in terms of financial returns, but in terms of the contribution of this sector to the livelihoods of these farmers in terms of their food security systems at farm household level. Hence, the analysis now becomes much more complex and becomes not as straightforward as one would want it to be, that it's an issue of gaining profits out of these enterprises like livestock production. And I've borrowed this diagrammatic presentation of how these livestock markets are actually intertwined within the household sector. As you can see there on the center, as you can see at the center there, we do have the livestock enterprise. And then it's linked to the household needs in terms of food security issues. And it's also linked to the crop enterprises, where they actually supply manure and they are the sources of the draft power and to all these enterprises. And at the same time, they are also exerting pressure on the soil here in terms of degradation. One is they provide manure, but there's a lot of degradation that comes with it in terms of the need for grazing. And I think Prof. Mbatha highlighted how the land reform challenges, the progress of land reform is actually impacting heavily in terms of livestock production and livestock value chains. But as we try to scale up this animal production, we have to be cognizant that our land, in which all these communities that we are talking about, the smallholder communities, is not growing. The population is growing in terms of humans. You know, more households are, are actually built within the same land, and they are eating away all our land that it was meant for grazing areas. And I think if you go back to these communities, you start seeing some new homesteads being built in some areas that traditionally used to be, it used to be grazing land. And the question is, what is the future of livestock production in these communities? And every time we hear about the government developmental plans, it's also about the expansion of urban areas into those communities as a way of creating, white-collar jobs. But to what extent are those growths going to affect the livestock enterprise and the farmer whom we want to scale up here? So those dynamics are not that straightforward, but I think they can also be subject for analysis to say, as the government progresses the agenda of industrialization, creating jobs, encroaching into rural communities, which are traditionally pastures and grazing land, what is the extent and what is the sustainability of extensive animal production here in terms of growth? Or we have now to recondition our farmers, our smallholder farmers, to say, possibly this is high time they also have to think of intensive cattle production, feedlot systems and all that, so that they can at least remain with something. I am not saying I have an answer to this, but it could be possibly a point where we need to start thinking in terms of research. And in terms of inefficiencies, what are the sources of inefficiencies along the livestock value chains? If you look at the livestock value chain, unlike the crop value chains, there are a fair bit of restrictions in terms of entry into this livestock value chain. Take, for example, livestock. When you get into the livestock enterprise, even when it comes to the marketing, there is lots of health compliance that you need before you sell your livestock. There is lots of, even if you want to sell into these formal markets, your livestock must be healthy. They must be free from these common diseases like your foot and mouth, your anthrax. So it's not just a straightforward market that you can say anyone can just enter. Yes, we do it. We keep animals, but that's why at times it ends up being informally traded, and we end up doing, farmer to farmer trading or servicing our own communities. And the challenge as well, which could be another source of challenges in the area, is this issue to do with cattle rustling. And I think Prof. Mbatha has highlighted the Mbatha areas, the areas bordering all these neighboring countries, your Lesotho, your Mozambique on the other side, your Zimbabwe on the other side. So all these areas, they are also bound to these cattle rustling syndicates, which also needs to be kept in a way. And all these things, they are exerting pressure on the livestock value chain, and they are exerting pressure on the sustainability and the future of this value chain. And along with the price distortions, the price that you get when you go into a community for a beast or for an animal, is it the same price that somebody who is participating in an auction or in a formal value chain would get for a similar breed? And some of these breeds, they are also mixed breeds. They are not pure breeds, most of them. But then it also distorts now to say, how much can you offer this livestock? And because some of these farmers are selling out of distress, we sell a livestock not because in most cases we need money for luxury development. We sell because these farmers, they want to pay school fees or they want to buy basic necessities in the family. So, and these things are normally urgent. So the price at which they negotiate these prices in most cases it's giveaway, so that they can be able to sustain the families in the short term. So, and coupled with the limited grazing as well, you might find that most of these farmers, they actually end up selling not because they want, but because they are forecasting or they've seen drought coming, and then they end up disposing their livestock at giveaway prices, and they are not getting much in terms of the returns from their livestock. But then, to what extent can these inefficiencies be eliminated or minimized? Because that is the source of the strength of this market. Can we be able to eliminate, or can we be able to minimize? And I think that is the task that all of us here who are doing research into these systems say, to what extent can we minimize these inefficiencies? And once we minimize these inefficiencies, then we can be able to say we have achieved something in terms of sustaining the sector. And the important dynamics of livestock sector in the market, and it has also been illustrated in the diagram that I shared with you, the figure that I shared with you, to say the important dynamic here is informally driven in most of the smallholder farmers. This informal market, the question is, this informal market that we're talking about of livestock, to what extent does commercialization of this sector improve returns to these farmers vis-a-vis the cost that comes with formalization? So we might think that, of course, increasing these farmers, taking them from the production level higher up the ladder into processing, obviously it gives them better returns, but is it always the best thing to do for smallholder farmers? Or keeping them at the level at which they can operate and then make sure we minimize inefficiencies at that level can actually increase returns? Again, this is another subject of analysis that we might want to explore. Does commercialization or formalization always bring the desired returns for these farmers? We might realize that possibly keeping them informal as they are, but minimizing production inefficiencies might actually make them better off than just, thinking of putting them in a formal market where they need to compete with well-resourced farmers. And is the current model sustainable in terms of the livestock numbers vis-a-vis extensive production systems, control of pests and diseases, and returns per each enterprise? So I think I've talked about the encroachment of urbanization into most of these rural communities. Are the current numbers really, are the current production systems sustainable, and are they viable enough? And then we also need to take into account that what is making most of these smallholder farmers not to grow is that these farmers, they are continuously faced with droughts, frequent droughts. Almost every, now and then, a year, 2 years, a drought comes, wipes out all these livestock. They start again, they start restocking again. And because of that, most of these farmers have got low market offtake. They can't sell because every time they need to sell, they're thinking of, oh, but I only have 5. If I sell 1, then I'm left with 4. What is going to happen in terms of my production of crops, where this is also the source of draft power? So this low market offtake has to be analyzed in conjunction with all the sustainability indicators that we need to be able to look at. So, and what is the real issue here? Can we change this low market offtake by other mechanisms, possibly by contract farming? And we have seen contract farming being practiced in crop production, where big enterprises come in, give inputs, give support, loans to farmers, start producing crops that they can supply that big enterprise buyer, and then by so doing, they've guaranteed their market. If we extend the same model of contract farming to livestock farming, smallholder farmers, to what extent can we be able to change the market offtake? But as we change that market offtake, to what extent can that model also end up, fast tracking or, increasing the pace at which we degrade the land? Because everyone now is stocking over 50 cattle, and you add up those numbers by the number of livestock farmers within an area, and then with this land that is limited, and with a low pace of, land reform, what is the possibility that the contract farming as well, if it goes aggressive, can end up degrading the land environment? But there is scope for that, given that the current numbers are actually very low. Maybe it can be allowed to a certain extent, and up to a point when these farmers can really become sustainable, and then we leave them to run themselves. And what I have actually picked up from Prof. Mbatha's model, some market auctions, is that most of these auctions that are running currently, these are auctions that are more intermittent, and they are more once-off, maybe monthly. They come in, farmers bring in their livestock, they negotiate. We have heard of 1 hour to 2 hour negotiations, and then a price is agreed, then a cow goes, and then the farmer gets his money, the buyer gets his livestock, and they go. And then I am saying, what of thinking of something sustainable like a marketing center model? This has also been proposed, and it runs in the same way that agri-parks are doing in the livestock sector. And they run in the same way that auctions are running in the livestock sector. However, we are saying, why can't we extend the services that these auctions can offer, or what this what this center can offer? If farmers can now then go and access veterinary services in some of these localized centers, because what we are trying to say here is, instead of us encroaching our communities with urban centers, then we build these centers that are basically specialist centers where farmers can actually access these centers for veterinary services, for feeds, for training, and for grading purposes. You can go there, you can get everything, and then you go back and do your farming. As even if we want to say, let's intensify production of livestock, these centers can actually offer such feedlots facilities where a farmer can actually deposit their animals there, being charged for services, fatten the animals maybe for a specific period, and then participate in an auction within the same setup. If you don't wish to, then you take up your livestock, but you still have to pay for the cost of the fattening and all that. These are just my thought that possibly something like that can actually operate much better, and there's much, a multiplier effect to the farmer than actually setting up an urban setup within a community that is aspiring to produce more livestock. So that could actually can make the smallholder farmers much more competitive in terms of the markets, and can actually be able to actually grow the local economies. And in terms of the role of abattoirs, what can the role of abattoirs be in this type of model? Possibly we can talk of co-ownership of these market centers with the communities, where the shareholding pattern can actually be determined by the number of livestock that a certain farmer has sold. So basically the sender will procuring from the farmer at a market-related price, and the proceeds that comes out of that, it could be given to a private person running the sender, maybe owning 15% of that, and maybe the government funds it another 15%. 80% is owned possibly by or 70% by the farmers who really sell or who trade their livestock into these models. And then you are given then your dividends based on the number of livestock that you have actually sold. So if you have not traded your livestock on that sender, then you are not a shareholder for that specific year. But for the year that you have sold, then your shareholding is actually determined. So it fluctuates basically based on how much you have traded. So it gives an incentive to the farmers to actually push in their livestock to that model, and at the same time they are getting the market, the sell value and the dividends at the end based on the profits that model would have generated within the communities. And in conclusion, I'm saying that there is need actually to explore the potential of big abattoirs in development of smallholder farmers. How can the big abattoirs really participate effectively in terms of empowerment of these communities, instead of just coming in, solicit for livestock and move away? What programs can be run in these local communities to ensure sustainable, growth of that sector? And possibly a holistic approach to future land reforms must involve market support programs, beneficiary training, and marketing and matching regions to specific viable enterprises to increase the returns of land reform. And by that, I can say thank you very much for the opportunity that you have given me to share my insights and my thoughts about the whole livestock sector. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dr. Muchara. That's really stimulating and also just full of practical questions and solutions. Okay, normally we would go back to Prof. Mbatha to answer some of those issues or to expand on them. But we also trying to wrap up in around 10-15 minutes. So it's probably better if we just go straight on to the question section where people have written in, and then we get Prof. Mbatha to respond, maybe also Dr. Muchara if he has something to say. So I think maybe that's what we'll do now, just because of the short time, and I'll read out the questions, people also free to add in. And then we could just try to get very quick responses by Prof. Mbatha and possibly also Dr. Muchara. So the first question is, what breed do these farmers keep? Can you answer that, Prof. Mbatha? Your sound is off.
So from the literature data, about 70% is mixed breed, and then they've also got, I think, 30% Nguni cattle. But specifically in Matatiel, I can't answer that, but that's the general trend in the Eastern Cape.
Okay. Okay, great.
So maybe the ERS people who are actually working with the farmers may have straight answers. Yeah. So yeah, that's it.
Okay. All right. So then we have another question by Monde Doma. And the question is, what could be the factors that influence the participation rates of small-scale farmers in the Eastern Cape versus Kenya? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so many variables, I've kind of highlighted during the presentation. Some of them are more speculative. I just also think that because the agricultural sector is so big in Kenya, so that means that more people have to participate who are participating in the economy are participating in the agricultural sector. And then because it's less regulated, I mean, one of the cases I look at was in dairy, in cooperatives around dairy production. And there was less red tape around farmers getting together, find 2,000 farmers getting together without having to fill in that form and comply with that regulation and that regulation. That would put money together, buy big containers of milk. Even if you had 2 cows, you could still join the cooperative, and then a truck would move around through the villages and collect milk every day. And then at the end of the month, people would get their shares depending on how much contributions in terms of liters they had contributed to their own cooperative. So those are the things that I see. And then you would have things like milk ATMs that get filled, and consumers would come in with buckets and then just put in money and then switch on the tap and get milk and take home. Those are things that I think would be very difficult to implement or to encourage in South Africa. So because of less regulation as well, there's more room for innovation and creativity. But like I say also in the presentation, also abuse of the system and abuse of the farmers themselves. So, there's always that, but those are on top of my head would be for me, what are some of the blockages there in terms of participation between the two countries in the economy and in agriculture.
Okay, excellent. There's another question by Monde Doma. Okay, the question is, does your study look into how much influence have government programs played in trying to redistribute the balance of power between the markets and producers, that is small-scale farmers? In other words, are the government programs making any difference in transforming the landscape?
Yeah, when you talk about government, even at a local level, participation of extension service officers, you don't find them there. These efforts in South Africa, it appears to me, are mainly driven by research, the research community and NGOs. And then in Kenya, they are driven by small business entrepreneurs. In Kenya, specifically, government often gets involved where they have to come in and tax and collect revenue, not in terms of encouraging transformation. In South Africa, yeah, we're sort of like facing a similar kind of a challenge, and that seems to also be growing. So we are good at policy formulation, not so good at designing, implementation, plans for these policies. So then the responsibility is delegated to the research community and NGOs. And I say that this, so the role of government, I'm afraid, practically, it's not impressive. Even the police, the SAPS, in checking up, they would come in at the auctions long after the people have been registered, and just come in and check in, and you'd see it's almost like rubber stamping the whole process. And then within an hour, they are gone, and then problems would arise after they had left. So we are, so in Kenya, it's clear that the state is almost a non-player in these agricultural markets. In South Africa, the role of the state is slowly washing away.
Okay, thanks a lot. There's a question by Buko Gusha, and it is, do you have any idea why Kenyan farmers seem to be more resilient? Any lesson that we can take from them? If any, are they applicable in our context? And so, what are the price negotiations for livestock sales based on? For example, livestock weight, age, etc. So yeah, two questions really. One about the resilience of Kenyan farmers, another about the price negotiations.
Okay, just repeat the first part. Why are Kenyan farmers more resilient? That's the question.
Yeah. Do you have any idea why Kenyan farmers seem to be more resilient? And are there any lessons that we can take from them? If any, are they applicable in our context?
And I do think that South African farmers have to start taking more lessons from Kenyan, not just Kenyan farmers, but Kenyan population. Because in the post-colonial Africa, history kind of just like goes through the same trajectory. So the reason why I'm saying this is that the Kenyan government is by far more corrupt than the South African government. I mean, when we talk about corruption in South Africa, the level of disengagement of government. And I think this you are just on your own. And you find this both in East Africa and West Africa, where people have had to just get up and take the initiative themselves, and because otherwise they are not waiting, but the state is not there to come and put up these security measures for people to survive. And I think that's the environment within which these people are operating in, including farmers. So it's now a cultural thing. And the reason why I talk about history, I think more and more as our state loses a grip on how to manage society and the economy as a whole, more and more our environment is going to require from all economic players to start being more proactive. Unfortunately, that comes with pros and cons. See loss of innovation, creativity, but you see loss of abuse, taking shortcuts. I mean, the reason why Kenya cannot export most of its meat is because it doesn't meet the health requirements. But in South Africa, it does, because there's still this regulation. So yes, that's my response. So okay. What's the second part?
The second part is the question is, what are the price negotiations for livestock sales based on? For example, livestock weight or age, things like that.
So some of the features that I've noted in markets, if it's the gender, if it's a cow, the money is higher, definitely the weight, but it should not be older. So those three variables are key. An animal that is much younger, so the meat is softer, but obviously the weight, because it's, you know, it's well fed, probably it's also healthy, and as well as the gender. If it's just like an old bull, you know, you'd find it weighs so many kilograms, much more, but it still doesn't sell for a higher price that you'd expect.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, and just to everyone, I'm going to just add that we're running very slightly over time, but I think let's go through the questions. We're getting through them. So we'll probably go over by 5 or 10 minutes. But we have a question for Dr. Muchara, and it's from Wande Duma. And the question is, Dr. Muchara, isn't the decline of extension services in South Africa not affecting or contributing to the problem? From what one observes in the field, it appears that extension services are almost non-existent to support smallholder farmers. It seems to come in dribs and drabs. Okay, if you could answer that, please, Dr. Muchara.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with Monte. There is, lots of research that has pointed to the weaknesses within the extension services. It's partly, blamed for the decline in numbers, because most of the extension services is not that specialized for enterprise. You find one extension officer being allocated a certain community, is responsible for both livestock and crops. And most of these enterprises, they would really require somebody who is specialized animal scientist and being present on the farms. And I think people have also questioned the number of the training programs that goes into our extension officers to say most of these, they are graduates, they've never reared animals or they've never done crop production themselves. And they are going out there to, to work with farmers. Most of these farmers have even much more knowledge than some of them. This is some of the research that normally comes out. But I agree with Monde that we really need to do something, and maybe the government needs to do something. The education system as well as academics, we need to do something as to the way we train extension officers and the way we actually groom them to be competent extension officers. And at the same time, the government has to really resource them and capacitate the extension services. But I agree with that is partly to blame, though I cannot, give you the statistics, but there's multiple research that points to that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, Charles asks, low market offtake of cattle. This might be a reflection of the multi-purpose use of livestock by the smallholder producer. Selling cattle is mostly a last resort, or distressed sales or salvage value. Okay, does anybody want to comment on that?
Yeah, so so that's a comment that I can link to some of the propositions that Muchara made around shifting from livestock possibly to crops, if we are interested in participation, improved participation. And, we have to ponder on, by the way, I like that livestock enterprise flowchart. I'm going to steal it for our research work, Muchara, with your permission, and I'll interrogate the marketing center model. Back to the uses of livestock. I mean, for these communities, true, livestock, cattle ownership is a cultural identity. And this shift of trying to move these cultural uses these uses of animals from just being culture-based to business is a struggle. I mean, the NGO, people in the NGOs will tell you on the ground that stop calling, you are now a commercial farmer, I don't remember the exact terms, maybe some of my colleagues can remind me, but there's this saying that you are now a business, but it's like the education that has to go into it to try and shift this mindset. But going back to Muchara's question around how can we, for the success of the land reform project, more participation, I think when I said culture trumps strategy, this for me, this is what it means, that how are we then, I mean, I think it's probably a sensible proposition to make, but how are we then going to change this cultural identity around cattle ownership. Because really, and often those cultural issues or variables are not necessarily aligned with national projects or national policies, including participation, improved participation of emerging farmers in the land reform project. They're not even aligned with environmental considerations, that are sort of like coming from a global place. So how are we going to be aligning these cultural issues on the ground, making sure that they talk to that? For me, I think is something that we need to think seriously about, and how we can navigate it. I mean, my aunt just passed away. She was a Sangoma. I'm in KZN. I'm running around. I'm looking for 3 goats and a bull. Otherwise, I don't know, how my family is going to risk. This is very important because she was a Sangoma, and we have to, that's how we identify with livestock ownership and the ceremonies around it. So it's a strong cultural identity that is dictating how people, which sector people, whether people want to farm crops or people want to keep livestock, besides the other uses, cultural uses of storage of value, etc. But somebody in another webinar discussion talked about the move towards goats because of resilience, because the less pressure they put on the environment. Something like that could probably take up well in KZN, because owning up goats, like I said, is a lot more culturally understood. I don't know to what extent it would take off in the Eastern Cape. So those are the cultural considerations there. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. So the last thing is really just an observation, it seems. So there's no need to answer to it, but I'll just read it. So James Gambitsa writes, brilliant presentations, Prof. Mbatha and Dr. Muchara. I have 7 key issues I would like to highlight. Okay, so that's, I guess that's something to follow up on in the future. So unless either of you want to add anything, I think I'm going to wrap up the proceedings. Do you have anything to add, Prof. Mbatha or Dr. Muchara, or should we close up? Your sound is off.
Dr. Muchara, thank you so much for a great response. By the way, Muchara is an expert on value chains. His specialty is often on crops, and the lessons from those value chains to the beef value. I'm going to be contacting you later on how you can assist us in building this model from all the lessons you've got in your head. Thank you so much.
Okay, sorry, and I just see that James Gambitsa actually wanted to, I suppose he wants to speak to you. So could you take the questions directly from James, if that's possible? If James is capable of speaking, does he have the power to?
Yes, he can be allowed to speak if he wants to speak, James.
I mean,
does he want me to go to his office?
Yes, can I speak, colleagues, just briefly?
Yes, please. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I realize that it's very, very late. I will highlight 7 key issues, which I think will be important for research, and we can make a follow-up with Prof. Mbatha and Dr. Muchara. The first thing speaks to the model of development. I think we need to move away from the design-based model to formative interventions. We can discuss offline. The other key issue is social justice issues, where smallholder farmers' animals are bought at a pittance and then sold later at a huge profit, as highlighted also by Dr. Muchara. And then the other thing is number 3, the 2 case studies. I think it's interesting, but I think Kenya, we should also look at the resource base. The last time I checked, the Rift Valley is characterized by very fertile soils, which support high quality forage, which can then sustain livestock, compared to in the Eastern Cape, where I've been working for more than 20 years. Some of these soils are poor, and that might require supplementary feeding. And then the 4th issue, livestock are more than just economic value. In other words, we need to look at the total value of livestock. And then the 5th point, small stock actually represent a hidden national asset. It's more than what is reported in our official statistics. We can discuss that. And also small stock are a gender equalizer in terms of farming. We see higher participation by female farmers or women farmers than say with cattle. And then the sixth point, which was raised by the speakers, is governance. Polycentric governance is key to the sustainable management of rangelands. And number 7, lastly, rehabilitation or restoration of smallholder farming rangelands. We need to look at simple methods, and Monde Duma here, PhD, is focusing on that. So those are the 7 points. Sorry for taking too much time, but we can discuss offline. I'm based here at Rhodes University, Department of Environmental Science. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's very insightful. Okay. Prof. Mbatha, if you want to add anything, otherwise I'm going to...
No, thank you so much. Please go ahead, Dr. Sadian, and close. Thank you so much. Everybody who's attended as well. Thanks.
Okay, colleagues, thank you for joining us. You'll find the recording of the webinar on the ISER YouTube channel, and it'll also be on other social media platforms, probably tomorrow at the latest. And your comments and questions will be welcome and will be responded to. We thank you for taking the time to join us and ask that you join us for future seminars. Any questions on or requests for collaborations, please visit our website, and there you'll find our contact details. So on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to say a big thank you to our presenter and respondent for such a great discussion. Also, thanks so much to the audience for really also submitting some excellent questions and making some great observations. Also, the ICR team have put a lot of effort into preparing the webinar, so really thank you to all of them too. Okay, enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again for taking the time to be here. Bye.